ancient ESL speaker, seriously ancient. I think I'm the person with the most university debating here, which is years of debating here, which is sad. And what I'm going to talk about in this workshop is about being ESL. It's about the particular difficulties that we face as ESL speakers, and it's about both tools and strategies to overcome those difficulties. Before I do that, I'm going to make a few intern remarks. The first one is, I've received the comment in numerous tournaments and workshops I have given, we don't actually believe you're ESL. I'll say this. First of all, when I started debating, my English was far, far worse. I started debating, as do many Israelis, right after the army. I have never ever lived outside Israel. I have never ever received any form of education in English. And other than the fact that most Israeli TV is in English, I was not very much exposed to English. The reason my English got better is partially because I debate a lot. And one of the words of advice I'm going to tell you later on is, if you are serious about the international circuit, you need to regularly debate in English. It's not fun, it's a lot more challenging, you often feel as though you don't fulfill yourself, as though you're not making the most brilliant things you could have said in your native tongue, but that is just the real life. And to be honest, if you have any aspirations, that's the only way to make it. The other thing that I'm going to say, and I have stolen this from Will's first workshop, is there is not much I can do about bad judges. There will be judges who would penalize you because you don't speak as fluently. There will be judges who would think an argument is impressive only because it is done with an Oxford accent. Nonetheless, I do think most judges are not like that. I think particularly within the European circuit, people are very ESL aware and therefore are very much inclined to understand the particular difficulties that ESL debaters face. And that is why I do believe, in a way, this workshop is still useful. You will, however, come across judges who will you feel have treated you unjustly simply because you weren't as fluent, or you didn't have that brilliant accent, or you don't have the beautiful vocabulary to understand that if you say negative externalities, that would save you about 5 sentences in a debate. That's just life. Let's start with a short discussion, because obviously, all of your ESL speakers, what do you think are the main barriers that you're facing when you come to a debating tournament?
Vocabulary.
Vocabulary, okay. So we have the issue of vocabulary. What else? Oh, also, in line with the fact that I said I'm very ESL, I do not know how to spell. If I'm writing things with spelling mistakes on the board, feel free to comment on that, but bear in mind that that will happen. So we have vocabulary issues. What else?
Fluidness.
What?
Fluid.
Fluency. What else?
It's much harder to develop complicated arguments. So
sophistication, I think, is a very big issue. I've adopted Will that I'm only writing in caps, apparently. Yes. What else?
It's harder to understand others' arguments.
Especially, I think, and this is important, if you go to an international and very varied tournament, people have different accents. And surprisingly, it is a lot harder for an ESL speaker to understand different accents than it actually is for a native speaker. Because what happens is, I'll give you my most famous story. First world I attended, first prop would come, it was a debate about Arafat. Obviously, as an Israeli team, we thought we know quite well about the subject. Then comes the judge and he gives us the feedback and he said, first, Haifa A. And I look at my partner and I go like, and the judge looks at us and goes, what's the problem? I'm like, did you say first or did you say fourth? Because in a very thick Scottish accent, you just can't differentiate the two. And it is often the case that comes a speaker ahead of you and speaks for 7 minutes and you're barely able to understand what his main points are. What else?
Time, because you speak slowly.
Time management. Very good. What else?
it's got something to do with thought process. Like you think to an extent in your native language and then you sort of translate and speak it out.
So you have issue, it is a sub-issue of vocabulary, I think, of concepts. Okay, so there are certain things that are very clear to you as a, not just a word, but a certain
As a whole,
concept of
within
thought that is in your native tongue and you're not sure how to say that in English. What else?
General madness.
What?
General madness.
General madness is always an issue in debates. It's not particular to ESL.
מטבעות לשון.
Like you don't know, okay, I don't even know the English word for
coins,
that,
phrases.
but phrases, idioms is the word I'm
Yeah.
looking for. We don't know idioms. Often people sound very, very sophisticated when they use idioms. I will say one thing about it. Often when you try to literally translate Hebrew idioms, it works amazingly well. So you say something like, oh, it's like letting the cat guard the cream. And everyone goes, that's a clever analogy. And you go like, that's just a common phrase. So that actually, I think, works both ways in a way. I think a lot of what you said here is important and is crucial, but doesn't go down to the deep roots of the issues. I think a lot of these are like technical problems we can overcome. We're going to talk about tools to overcome them. But I think that there are several more crucial issues. I think the first one is in terms of timing. It's first of all the fact that if you think in your native tongue, usually constructing the method takes you more time. Because what happens to me is I hear a motion. If it's a long motion, it would take me also a lot longer than anyone else to write it down, because Hebrew writing is very, very different to English writing. I would then start thinking about it, and again, I would mostly think in Hebrew, and only then start working the translation process. So that's, again, one thing that is very, very impeding, I think, for ESL speakers. I think the other thing is we don't sound as good. And that goes to vocabulary, that goes to fluency, that goes to sophistication, and that is something that judges often notice. So now comes the question of how do we overcome these two issues? You want something that? And I think first of all what I want to talk about is the tools. So the first thing that I said is, and it doesn't have to do with a specific tournament or with a specific debate or anything, is like over the course of your debating career. So like I said, first of all, you need to debate in English and you need to debate a lot in English. The other thing is, anything debating related you do is better done in English. So, for example, if you do research, if you read magazines, if you do all that sort of stuff, it is better if you do it in English. I know my English improved immensely because I've started reading The Economist. And that helped me in several ways. It helped me because The Economist is very much the debater's guide of the world. So it has the concepts you need. It has the phrases you need. It has the vocabulary you need. But also it has analysis in a way that is easy for me to follow up and that I can later on recreate during a debate. So I honestly think that if you do the research, if you do the reading in English in advance, that already improves your English. Then comes the issue of prep time. Now I always tell my students, so they all know it, you have to prep in English. You cannot spend 15 minutes discussing an issue in your native tongue and then expect to be able to immediately deliver a speech in English. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work even for people whose English is perfect. It doesn't work because it takes time to make the transfer from one language to another. And what will happen is that you'll have your first minute or minute and a half of your speech where you just stumble upon words because you're not fluent. So you have to do the 15 minutes preparation in English. Then we come to the issue of notes-taking. Here are a few things. First of all, breaking news from an ex-partner of mine, spelling doesn't matter. She would nudge me in the middle of debate and say like, how do you spell exacerbate? Who cares? It's your notes. Write it in spelling mistakes, but make sure the notes are in English. Why? Because if you have notes in Hebrew, what will happen is you'll have the general idea because you've discussed it in English. But I'm sorry, by the way, that I keep on using Hebrew. I know there are people here who speak other languages, but this is just an easy example for me. You'll have the basic concepts because you've discussed them with your partner in the 15 minutes of preparation. But what you will not have is the ability to use key words. There are specific what we call power words within a speech. The things, the phrases that you, especially if you're in the top half of the debate, what usually happens is if you have a key phrase and it then reiterates throughout the debate, you have made an impact on the debate. You have set the phrase that later on changed the tone of the debate, and judges will credit you with that. This is the sort of stuff that is very hard to improvise, And this is why you need your notes to be in English, because you need to be able to use these catchphrases. Now I know some people write their notes mixed. So they use like their native language for the obvious stuff, and then they write key phrases in English. I don't think that works. I think that actually complicates the writing. The next thing that I'm going to say is have unbelievably organized notes. Everyone who knows me knows that I color code. There is a reason for that. People sound less persuasive when they stand on the table and they go like, what I want to say is this, this, and this, and no. Oh, 1 second there. Okay, yeah, so my point is, it just doesn't sound as persuasive. Now, when you're ESL, and on top of just getting the usual getting stuck that speakers do, you also get stuck on words, you also get stuck on your ability to find your way in your notes. That has a far worse impact. And that actually leads to a lot less persuasive speech. I'm going to talk about style later on. But what I want to emphasize now is that the more organized your notes are, the more coherent and fluent your speech is going to be. The last thing that I'm going to say, and this also goes to following the debate and listening to other speakers, is this. I use a ton of abbreviations and codes and marks. Okay, so like I would never bother writing increase. I would just say upwards arrow, or logically flowing for that, decrease would be this. I never write because, I write BC. I never write Western liberal democracies. I write WLDs. If I'm judging, I never write unsubstantiated assertions. I write USA. The point is this. If you dedicate less time to writing the phrases that are easily abbreviated, you have more time to think. Because what usually happens is, not only that you're struggling with following them, you're even more struggling with writing down what they have. And I think often ESL speakers have a lot of issues with rebuttal, because by the time they wrote the argument down, they don't have the time to come up with a very good answer to that. So I think the less you write in terms of using abbreviations, using shortcuts, using whatever code you have to signal things, it helps you then have better notes, which helps you then have a much better debate. So that's basically in terms of taking notes. Next is the issue of points of information. So here are two things. If you're the person offering the point of information, this is a well-deserved advice to any debater, but it is particularly relevant to ESL debaters, write it down. Always write down your points of information, because what often happens is you get up on a point of information, you get stuck on the words or on the overall phrasing of the sentence, and the speaker would just say, this is taking too much time, sit down. And it's kind of rude, but it's also understandable. You only have 7 minutes of speech. You want a point of information to take no longer than 10-15 seconds. It's unfortunate that the speaker is struggling because he's ESL, but at the same time, this is my time as a speaker. I want them to get the point. So write down your points of information. Be sure you know what you're going to say before you open your mouth. In terms of taking a point of information, because the issue of following the debate is, I think, most bizarre in the sense of someone comes up to you with a point of information and you go like, blah, 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 and you go like, well, yes, of course. Have faith in your partner. What I normally do in this case is I dismiss the point of information with a sentence or two, and then I say, but my partner will elaborate on that issue. And I leave it to my partner, who has a lot more time to think of what the question was, to understand it, and obviously to phrase an answer. I also will point out at this point that it is perfectly legitimate to ask someone to speak slower, because you can't follow them. In general, Worlds and Euros judges are instructed that if a speaker speaks too fast for people to follow them, he should be penalized. Like, this is what we tell judges to do. Not all of them do that, but if you actually point out the fact that you're struggling with understanding them, I don't know of any judge who would ignore that plea. And I do think that it's important sometimes, in certain cases, to point that out.